My name is Robbie Peters. I'm the co-founder of People Tech Partners. We're an organization that works with strategic HR leaders across the industry to work with early stage HR technologies, and very, very excited today for the panel we have. I've actually known quite a few of these companies and practice leaders for quite some time, so to be able to actually come together and have this panel, it's awesome. Just wanted to get a quick pulse of who's in the room. So how many folks here are on the HR side of an employer? Awesome. And then how many folks are building companies in the space? Great. And then any folks here too from the education side? All right. We've got quite a mix here. So always kind of good to know and understand. I think we've got a unique panel up here today. Definitely we'll have a focus on the employer side and kind of how coaching is being brought into the workforce quite a bit. But we'll kind of have a very interesting panel ourselves because we've got quite a few folks that have built companies that are up here. We've got folks that are practitioners, and then we've also got Laura who can kind of give us a macro overview from HBR. So really excited, and thank you all obviously for joining us today. We've spent quite a bit of time prepping for this panel and chatting beforehand, and I know we don't want to go into extensive backgrounds, but would be curious, I think when we were talking, just to understand maybe down the line a little bit about what brought you into this area of coaching, and maybe sharing some personal reasons or areas that you see coaching being very exciting in the workforce.
Yeah, so my name is Toby Harvey. I'm the CEO and co-founder of a company called Bravely. We're a new kind of benefit that connects employees to professional coaches outside their workplace when they have some sort of acute moment at work. It can be an important performance conversation or a reaction to conflict with a colleague, and we get them connected to a coach who can help them work through that imminent situation and go forward within the organization. And I tell you that because my personal story was experiencing that myself, having a moment at work and seeing friends who turned to other friends and got a mix of bad advice or people just telling you what you want to hear, not what you need to hear. And it sort of struck me that we'd all be better served by having an external sounding board who could check us on some of that and help us think things through and get the clarity of thought, the confidence, or the skills, the languages to go forward and resolve situations before they escalate into something bigger. So we've all experienced those moments, and that was what drove us to create Bravely.
Awesome.
Hi, I'm Laura Helliwell, and I work for Harvard Business Publishing, and we provide a lot of materials about coaching and mentoring. And my personal story would be the switch from traditional product development to agile product development, and the mindset that all your functional managers have to make into a servant leader, which actually happens to be very close to how to being a good coach, right? Being listening, and getting the people that you're working with to come up with the right answers for them. So that is, and from coaching, you asked me for some statistics, and from a Harvard Business Publishing point of view, 250,000 employees visited our coaching materials in the last 12 months.
Wow.
So it tends to be in the top 5 subject areas for corporate employees looking for coaching materials.
Great, thanks. And I'm Sue Olsen. I lead the people team at Course Hero. We're a company in the Bay Area, Silicon Valley. And I've always had a real passion for coaching. I started my career and was really interested in being in the business. And so we lead our team that way in having our team in the business instead of sitting away from the business. And I was sharing with the panel, I had an aha moment when I started Course Hero about a year ago. About a quarter into it, I decided I wanted to get to know the people in the function more, so I started a rotation where I was sitting every 2 weeks within our pods. We have an open workspace, and I realized the mutual mentorship that was going on. I learned a lot from the younger talent, because we now have 5 generations in the workplace, and I was providing them with wisdom. And from that, more of employees asked me if I could spend time either with lunch or breakfast or mentoring them, and I realized that's not scalable. So it's great to have tools where we can scale as we have these 5 generations in the workplace.
I'm Alexi Robichaud. I'm one of the co-founders of BetterUp. I'm incredibly lucky. My passion of coaching actually started when I was in high school. So some friends and I started an after-school club. We were super geeks, coaching each other on Dale Carnegie and Napoleon Hill. And throughout my professional career, I continued to mentor and coach these high school students. And then I was fortunate enough to have the startup at which I work get acquired, and overnight I became a very young executive at a very large tech company and did not do so well. And so I burnt out, and through that process I realized I needed what we were giving the high school students. I needed me for me, and I started looking at therapy, I started looking at coaching, I did the Camino de Santiago, I did the Landmark Forum, which is like basically a cult. I did a lot of stuff out there, and I realized, like the only thing that spoke to me was the work of like Martin Seligman, Angela Duckworth, and this school of positive psychology, and no one had really operationalized that. And so that was the idea of BetterUp, is how could we bring really evidence-based coaching into the hands of professionals worldwide, so that they can actually reframe work as an opportunity to flourish and realize their potential, instead of being what it was for me, which was really exhilarating, but also really exhaustive in my own experience.
I'm Chessa Eskandanian Yee. I'm the founder and CEO of Leader EQ. I got into coaching like Alexi. I was lucky enough to be coached in high school, and I was always a shy kid that probably would have never sat on a panel and spoken in front of people. And I had that one person that inspired me to find my voice and to find what was my passion. And lucky enough for me, that's people, and helping people find the right coach, I think, is one of the most important things in a coaching journey. And unlike myself, a lot of people have trouble finding that right coach. So our assessment is basically there to help match you with the right coach, and we're a marketplace. So any coach can join, and anybody can have the opportunity to be coached.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for sharing personal stories along with the introduction. I want to go back into something a little bit, Laura, that you had talked about, where I think we're excited to have you on this panel to really give the macro overview. Would you say that over the last 5-10 years, just the importance of coaching coming up in search, was that the same top 5 search 5-10 years ago, or kind of how are you seeing it evolve?
I definitely think it's evolving and growing, and I think a lot of the customers that we work with, large Global 2000 clients, almost all of them are going through a transformation.
That's right.
Employees are working in the VUCA environment. Learning agility is key. Being able to problem solve on your feet is key. And all of that, coaching is a great way to get those skills or increase your skills. And both, whether you can have a personal coach, a live coach, or whether you read some materials, or hopefully we can help managers be better coaches, it's all really, really important in today's work environment.
Awesome. And Sue, on your side, being in the practitioner seat, are you seeing employees ask for it more? How are you getting it approached as well? And then maybe expanding a little bit on kind of the 5 generations that you're talking about, and are they all expecting the same thing?
Sure. So we use a tool called Culture Amp. So we pulse our employees twice a year, and through that we can see the trends and what people are asking for. And I would say and it's for engagement. So we're looking to see if our employees are engaged and where we can surface issues and develop more. And I would say learning and development is always one of those right now. And then we'll double click into that and ask, what does that mean? Where can we provide additional support for managers or employees? And it's in development, it's in their career growth, and are they engaged? And then going back to the 5 generations, I think it's interesting because people that have been in the workplace for a longer period of time didn't have all the tools or talked more face to face. And I find with the younger generation, they're much more comfortable reaching out in Slack or sharing with me that they want to have a mentorship through Slack. And it's just been very interesting for me to observe that and then find that right spot. And so that's where I think I definitely like the face-to-face conversations and do best with those, but I think it would be great to be able to wrap the organization with other tools as well, just for what maybe those mentorship moments as well. Mm-hmm. So I don't think people ask me, I don't think it's going to replace the human element, but I think it's a complement to the human, the business partners in the business, plus an additional tool to support that.
Yeah, so talking about utilizing technology, and I think obviously knowing the 3 of your business fairly well, a big trend in what you're doing, Rad, is trying to bring coaching on demand in the time they want to in the communication channels. I mean, how do you all think about it? I would just love to hear your thoughts. Maybe start with you, Alexi, and just like when you're building for an organization, how are you trying to build the technology to make it scalable to the masses?
Yeah, you mean internally when we're building, or in partnering with a customer?
In partnering with customers, and just kind of how you viewed it in building.
Yeah, I mean, we engage mainly, to use, I think, the frame Laura gave, which is how we would engage with organizations, typically global 2,000 companies, through this lens of what transformation are you going through, right? So we find inevitably it's either a digital transformation, workforce transformation, right, or culture transformation, whatever it may be called. Companies are, I think, really having to very deeply reckon with that the world is a swirl, and we live in a very whitewater world today. It's not the world of steamboats and sail ships anymore. It's the world of kayaks down a river with lots of rocks you may not see, right? And companies who can read those currents and companies that can stay ahead do really well. And the formula we find most companies, as sold by Accenture and Deloitte, are pursuing is a combination of the classic technology component, right? So they're bringing in everything from Salesforce to Workday, the process component, so they're bringing in Deloitte or Accenture or McKinsey or Bain to make more agile process. But what we find often gets left is the people component, right? Which is, what are you actually doing to support and supercharge your human bandwidth, right? And actually not just optimize your HCM or not just optimize your procurement or business process, but actually optimize your frontline leader or manager. And I think that's where coaching is really distinguishable, and actually you get very differential returns when it's invested in that way. And so to do that, it's a combination of different types of engagement, to your point, Robbie, from on-demand, but whatever we do, what we really try to do is make sure we're laddering up to that people strategy that is in support of that business strategy, and helping the employee in the context of their company find success, which, as I think Reid Hoffman says really aptly, is this alliance, right? Where you are not going to promote yourself. That's like the one thing you can't do in business, promote yourself, right? And so if you want to see that career success, it's a combination of your own aspirations, your own agency, what you want to work on, but also really taking in place where the company's trying to go and what they want to work on as well. And so building that into our deployment, building that into the software, training the coaches around that enables us to help create that personal success that then is measurable for the organization as well.
That's awesome. Anything you want to expand on, Toby or Chessa, just around how you looked at this from a technology standpoint in building for organizations?
Yeah, I think for us, it didn't start with coaching. It started with thinking about people and what they were navigating at work that was holding them and their organizations back from success. But truly, I mentioned that I got a phone call from a friend one day who was going through a tough situation at work, and she wasn't ready to go forward internally. And she said the words to me, I love my HR business partner, but that's not where I'm going first, right? And it struck me that even in these well-resourced organizations, that people every day are feeling stress or uncertainty. They're not sure how to approach a conversation. They're unsure of reactions. They're unsure how it'll make them look. And so we started with the people side, the problems they were feeling, the misbehaviors it was driving, the problems it was creating for the organization more holistically. And then we realized that technology that connects those people to great experts, to unbiased professionals in those moments, was really how we could solve those problems. So coaching for us came as a solution to a problem that we identified that people are feeling every day, and not the other way around. Luckily, my co-founder Sarah has an HR background and knows much more of the subject matter than I do. But I think when we think about the consumerization of technology and important movements in healthcare and financial services, in coaching and HR and leadership development, what we're now seeing is a rise of technology to help people-centric problems and help people change behaviors ill-informed behaviors that people are going through every day. But I think somebody on this panel mentioned earlier, the power is connecting to other people and using technology as a conduit for that, or a reinforcement mechanism, creating nudges and reminders around those conversations that people are having, not as a replacement to the people themselves.
That's awesome. And why, I think another thing I wanted to talk into, and I know a few of you had mentioned some good research. Obviously, there's the rise in people asking more and more for coaching, but also just around kind of some of the lonely at work research. I don't know, I think maybe that was Laura that you brought that up. I'd love to hear you expand a little bit about how that's, really creating the demand for this currently too.
Yeah, in HBR, there was an article in the fall about how important or how valuable it can be to create peer-to-peer coaching networks within an organization. And they quoted a stat from from Forbes there that 40% of people at the workplace feel some form of loneliness. And it just struck me at the opening keynote today when he was talking about happiness, and one of the things that you need to be happy is relationships, right? So this all ties together. So the article in HBR was, how can we enable peer-to-peer coaching networks, because that forms the human-to-human connection, what Toby just said, and can reduce loneliness. And loneliness in the workplace absolutely leads to lower productivity, lower happiness, all sorts of not good things for a company. So empowering that peer-to-peer coaching network was a really positive force. Yeah.
Definitely. And Jess, I know you talked a little bit about this too, just around kind of not only empowering that, but also building, a lot of the empathy and connections within organizations. Can you expand a little bit about that and how that's really creating those connections?
Yeah, I think with the rise of technology, like we've all been saying, like we've become very reliant on our phones, on our computers in order to have those intimate connections. And that's not really getting to the core of what empathy is. Coaching people in a way to have them feel like they can be open in a workplace or just in general in all of their relationships without having that barrier of a phone or having that barrier of a computer, but utilizing that as a tool in order to help people enhance their emotional intelligence and their empathy. It's a simple question of just asking why someone feels the way that they do, that we kind of forget to ask. And it's because we're in an environment where everything is so transactional, everything's so quick, everything's so fast. And we're forgetting the human aspect of everything. And I think that's something that all of us are trying to enhance, is using technology as a tool to create more connections between each other and to really find that empathy within us, both in the workplace and outside of it.
Yeah, definitely. Anyone here want to talk a little bit about, obviously we're talking about bringing in outside coaching, but anything specific you've either done at your organizations or try to do through your platforms around building mentorship groups within the organization? Anyone wants to expand on that?
I can share. I've done this in the past out of an employee resource group, an ERG, where we supported, it was actually our women's group, and we supported a mentorship group, and we specifically were intentional about that so that, one, it didn't come out of the people department, so it was a little bit disconnected from that, and then anyone could opt into it, and it could be, it was mentor-mentee, and then group mentorships as well. And then one thing I've done in my own personal time is I've never group mentored, so I was in it when I was in between positions. I started a group mentorship and wanted to see if that was scalable, and it is. And so I still have a group of women from my past company, and I mentor, or they mentor me as well. It's awesome, and it's once a month, and it's distributed around the nation. So I wanted to see if that was a doable thing to do, and it is. So I would encourage people, if you know people, it's a really neat thing to do. And these women all were from my past company, and they now have gone out to other companies, and so the richness of us sharing our experiences, and it's just becoming more rich as we share and care for each other.
So I think, obviously we've been talking a lot about, the importance of coaching, and bringing it into the enterprises that is the place that's, supplying this for their employees in some sense, but it's not cheap, right? Like, so how do you, I guess, recognize when you all are building companies in this space, right? Like, understanding, obviously, we can all sit up in here and say coaching is absolutely something that everyone should have. I think many of us have had coaches and understand that, but how do you go to an organization that maybe doesn't have that culture and talk to them and tell an ROI story?
Yeah, a big piece for the Bravely approach is making coaching truly accessible to everyone in the moments when they need it and they self-select into it. And so it's expensive to put folks on a sort of traditional coaching program, and there are lots of great platforms that are making that more accessible for organizations. But we've taken the approach everyone can have access to a coach in key moments, and we distribute across the population. We charge on a per employee per year basis, and the idea is some people will never use it, some people will use it a lot, and some people will hit that sweet spot in the middle. But all of that can drive drive this really powerful change in behavior on those employees who are engaging the services and drive them to have a conversation earlier and more productively than they would have otherwise, which has a long-term benefit in terms of retention and productivity and overall workplace engagement. So we're trying to fully democratize that access to everybody as more of a behavior change platform, and coaching is one of the tools and resources, a powerful one that's available to employees in those moments. So much more like a traditional kind of benefit that people self-select into.
How do you guys think about it, Alexi? I mean, you're asking for a large enterprise budget. What are the ways that you obviously help?
Yeah, I think it goes back to behavior change, right? I mean, whether it's at the organizational level or the personal level, growth is about change, right? I mean, that's why CEOs are hired, and that's why CEOs are fired, because they didn't change enough, right? Or they changed too much in the wrong direction. What we know from the science, and there's now 30 years of rock solid science on what it actually takes to drive behavior change, it takes consistency. Right? It takes follow through, it takes constancy, it takes habit formation, and it takes a ton of rearranging of your brain and neuroscience happening to really adopt these new behaviors. And that's incredibly hard, right? To tell a successful manager to stop doing what made them successful, because guess what? The world's changing and now you're not going to be successful by doing it, is we've all worked for folks ourselves sometimes who can't make those adaptations. And so I think to your question, I reframe it and say, like, what's the cost of not doing this? The cost of not doing this essentially is you will be outpaced by a company who can, right? And so for us, we really take, from an ROI approach, we look at, hey, what are you trying to do? What are your goals? What is the upside of achieving those goals? And what's the cost of not achieving those goals? And identifying the discrete drivers of the behaviors and the leadership and the cultural transformation that has to occur for you to be able to perform the way you want to as an organization. That inevitably breaks down into individuals. Often in the research you find and in our own data, it's really the frontline manager, which is the most pivotal person in terms of performance and culture in an organization. And it's measurable, right? And so we look across 3 buckets of ROI, ranging from everything from traditional healthcare savings, presenteeism, absenteeism. We look at productivity increases. And then we also are able to look uniquely at longitudinal behavioral change. Everything from cognitive agility and the neuroscience, learning agility, to what Laura was speaking to things like resilience, grit, to what would traditionally be thought of as inspirational leadership, but using everything from conscientiousness and more reliable and standard measures of that. You can get a really fascinating read of the cost of not changing and the cost of changing, and from that you can bake what we've found, or our customers have found, to be a compelling ROI story.
That's awesome. Chess, anything that you wanted to discuss on that?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with Alexi. I think the cost of not using coaching is so high. And at the end of the day, the ROI, there are a lot of measurable numbers, but the effect that it has on culture and the effect that it has on retention and making people want to do their best work. We live in an incredibly competitive landscape. And if we're not always trying to strive to be our best, even beyond what we think is our best, and pushing ourselves, and a coach is always there to push yourself, whether it be in business or in sports or in music or whatever it may be. A coach is there to push you to be your best self and push you beyond what you even think are your own mental boundaries in order to reach your highest potential. So the cost of not using coaching is the fact that we're going to become stagnant, and that's not good for society, that's not good for our businesses, and that's not good for ourselves.
One thing we're starting to see anecdotally is better understanding of all the things that Alexi and Chester are talking about in terms of retention and the culture linked more to the talent acquisition side, right? Like, companies are spending so much money recruiting great talent. There's more of a mandate than ever to build out diverse teams and recruit women and people of color, LGBTQ, intersections of those identities. We bring those folks in the door, and the regrettable attrition rates for folks from underrepresented groups and across the board are way higher than any company wants, right? So sort of marrying the goals on talent acquisition with the goals on talent retention, using coaching and other learning and development programs to provide greater equity in the workplace, build more inclusive workforces. All of that is the same shared set of goals and the same set of very expensive problems for a company that holds them back from maximizing their potential. And that narrative is finally starting to get linked. And frankly, like, the talent acquisition side, we find has way bigger budgets than the sort of culture, retention, HR side. And so bridging that together is really important, and understanding, like, that sum of money, it's all for the same goal.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I want to go a little bit into, obviously everywhere we look, it's AI is somewhat eating the world or changing the way people
Eating the world.
I think I was going down the freeway this morning in San Francisco and it said, AI won't change you if you're retiring in the next 5 years, open up, Mass Mutual or something like that. So that was an interesting one I saw. But I am curious, just like, spending a lot of time.
Drop the mic, Robbie.
Drop the mic on that one. I think that was yeah. Go on. Just curious on how you're viewing it. I think from my side, look at a lot of different technologies, and I think the first place I really saw AI being rolled out was in the talent organization from a recruiting standpoint, for being able to source much faster, to be able to scan through resumes, to be able to really understand what people are looking through. I think the next area that I'm seeing a lot of interesting stuff happen is on the learning and development side. So curious on how everyone up here kind of views AI in learning and development, and maybe how you're building it into your current roadmaps of products as well. Anyone want to take that one?
I can start.
Yeah.
So we're doing a partnership right now with a company called Cultivate, and for a client. And what it does is it's a piece of artificial intelligence that you install, and it analyzes all the communication between the manager and direct reports. Both the email communication and the Slack communication. And then it points out to the manager, are you treating one employee differently than the other? Are you using enough rewarding complimentary language in your communication with your direct reports? And it compares you to other managers in your in your organization. So it's early days, but it shows a lot of promise. So.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, we have a relatively large, I think, investment in AI and machine learning. I think one thing in the conversation that I wish I heard more conversation about, is actually how AI intersects with social psychology and industrial psychology, right? AI is an amplifier, right? It's an automator, it's an amplifier. It has to, at some level, there's primitives that are being put in as inputs. And I think when you're dealing with AI, especially in the relation to human resources and career development, it's so important that you're first controlling for everything from unconscious bias to what the latest research shows actually works, right? Take something like the famous positivity ratio in feedback. Well, it's debunked. Apparently the feedback sandwich is a bad idea now, right? And so it makes sense, right? You're just bracing for the bad feedback the whole time. They get through the top bun. You're like, hit me with the meat, right? But what we've really tried to do is co-invest in our Better Up Labs program, where we're investing $25 million over the next 5 years on how do you combine cutting-edge neuroscience and organizational psychology together with AI, so that what you're spitting out, whether that in our case is a recommendation to a coach or whether that's a recommendation to a coachee, is really something that we, to the best of our human knowledge, think is virtuous and think actually works in this situation. And so that's the side of AI that I get most excited about, but also most worried about when you think about HR technologies. And a lot of the companies who have done automation, like Amazon, had to stop their AI hiring, right? Why? Because they didn't code in the right psychology, right? It was replicating and amplifying bias and compounding that, right? And so for us, I actually think, as we think about as human capital practitioners and leader, the first frontier, the technologists, there's a lot in AI, but I actually think the missing frontier for us is we have to go a lot deeper on the science, a lot deeper on the social sciences first, before we really probably want to fully unleash the power of AI.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's a great point. I think obviously, unleashing it in a place, and not every organization even is going to have the same reasons that you would want to, right? So Sue, when you're analyzing the programs that you're bringing in, right? I'm sure you don't want something cookie cutter out of the box. There's a certain culture that you have at Course Hero, right? So how do you view it, and how you can kind of either amplify, or the things that might scare you as an HR practitioner about it?
Yeah, I was thinking about that, and we are a very value-based organization, and really have behaviors that we tie that to. So if we don't have a tool like this yet, but if we were to do that, I would want to make sure that we could vet that and make sure that those folks that were bringing that feedback back into our employees were anchored to our values and behaviors. Because what one of our values is always learning, and I would just want to make sure that they, that would be when they're coaching that individual, that they were in line with our value. That can mean something very different at Amazon.
Totally.
So that would be very important for us as we vet out the truth. And I do believe we do need it. It is needed for scaling because we are moving so fast, and there is a demand, and it's showing in our engagement surveys that we're taking, that people want that learning and development. They want that continuous career development and professional development.
Yeah, yeah. And Laura, back to the cultivate side, just kind of, again, I've seen the technology. It is very interesting. I think, like you were talking about, Sue, it's got to make sure you're tying down to the values and people are aligned. So it's really having that opportunity to step back, define what you really want to do. But I mean, just kind of in the way I've been seeing this across technology, I mean, the power could be, when you get those aligned, the power is pretty awesome, right? It's almost like people go to a personal trainer because they're going to help them work on something specific, and they're going to continually follow up, and they're going to push them to do that, right? With what we're seeing now in some of this technology, Cultivate being, one of those, is actually being able to, be there at every moment when you're actually making this decision or doing it. Now, there's a lot of power behind that if it's done not the right way. So I think, again, Lexi bringing up a great point about really defining what that is for an organization, for someone individually. But it is pretty interesting to see how that also could help, advance people in the place.
I think one of the many challenges there will be is that some of the most powerful data, it's all about the data that informs that AI, right? It's, the psychology of the data, the inputs, and some of the most powerful are observed insights or observed behavior, and that's exactly, it sounds like what Cultivate is doing. It's observing sort of the interactions between people and giving the feedback. And a lot of the sources of data that we have around employees today are self-reported from those employees or through engagement surveys or other sort of again, self-reported tools. And capturing that observed behavior is creepy, right? We're watching these employees, how they interact with each other. And there's got to be a mindset shift for those employees and for us to really make that meaningful.
Absolutely.
I think there's also the point about the inputs, right? And how Amazon had to stop. But if you coach people to overcome their unconscious bias and to recognize their unconscious bias, the effect that coaching can have on AI can be so much more if people are receiving coaching and they're becoming more self-aware.
Oh, absolutely. I think there's been a lot of studies to the point of you're just continually putting in a certain bias, but if you're able to expand it out, I mean, the opportunities are endless to actually train you to say, I think you gave a great example. Hey, you're about to give some negative, harsh feedback, or you actually haven't expanded and talked to these 3 people as much as you've talked to these 7, right? And most people just can't recognize those things in their personal life. So there is, some very interesting opportunities there. But
number one reason why employees leave, they don't like their manager. It's number one reason, right? Yeah. So anything we can do to help our managers, like you said, the frontline managers especially, it's all goodness for the company.
Absolutely. Well, we're coming down to kind of the last 5 minutes. I wanted to maybe give everyone just another minute here to expand on just kind of either a prediction of coaching over the next couple of years, something interesting you think that's going to be happening, or anything else that you want to expand, an area that's being underutilized in coaching that you would like to see more of. Maybe I'll start with you, Toby. You're sitting closest to me.
On the spot. Yeah. I think that. I think we are all here because we believe that more people will have more access to coaching over time. I think there will be heightened awareness that people today who have access to sort of privileged coaching or learning and development platforms are, it's sort of over-indexed toward people who are already on the right path and the right trajectory. And there's a better opportunity to think about how we're serving folks that get overlooked and people from underrepresented groups or even different personality types who don't necessarily get onto that, who haven't been promoted to manager or aren't identified as high potential because that's sort of it's unclear how that's often decided. So I think we'll see the conversation around coaching shifting more to equity over time.
Yeah, for me, it's about the scale. I mean, being a good coach is it's a difficult job, and you're talking about behavior change. And I think, so we do need to rely on things like AI for the scale. We just have to, because otherwise we're not going to be able to get coaching into everybody's hands who needs it. So we do need the help of technology and AI to get to the scale.
Same, I believe the scale, and then also just constantly thinking about the 5 generations and the needs that are there. There's one area that we're starting to pilot right now, and we just extended our benefits for maternity and paternity, so people can take up to 4 months, and we're moving so fast. So we're looking to even provide the folks that come back with a coach, and independent of the company, so that they just have someone that they can talk to because they've had a life change event. They might come back into a different manager at that time. The business has moved forward, and we really want them to return back in and not have them decide that it's not the place for them anymore. So there's just a lot of different areas where the different cohorts and generations can be supported by the coaching and mentoring.
And just big parts of their life. I like that. I mean, you're talking about people being coached on how they enter back into the workforce, managers understanding how to accept them when they come out because they are on maternity leave. I mean, they're just great, obviously, opportunities for people.
I think we're at a super exciting inflection point. I equivalent it to, this is like in behavioral health, it feels like we're discovering germs. It's like germ theory, right? We're gonna look back and be like, remember there was this time we used to tell you like these crazy little monsters lived on the edge of the knife, and if you put it from one body to the other, you would like kill they'd hurt them, right? And we'd be like, of course, right? And I think that's where we are with behavior change. And what's most interesting to us scientifically right now in terms of where we're going is actually the introduction of the concept of dosage. So behavioral transformation, whether that's clinical or non-clinical in coaching, still is, I think, impaired in its efficacy by essentially being a one-size-fits-all. Like, there's no recommended dosage of therapy. You just go until you're better. And we know most people don't go. And one reason people don't go is probably because they don't know how long it will take for them to get better, right? And we find that to definitely be true in coaching. And what we know from our data is if people are going through a career transition, they engage 50% longer with coaching voluntarily. And so there are definitely these moments that matter in your life where dosing needs to modulate, right? And so that's where, if we're going from predictions, I think one of the, I guess I would say, I think we're gonna see a whole new body of behavioral science emerge that's actually dose dependent. Like if you take something like the gratitude journal exercise, Sonia Lubomirsky, who works with us and at UCR, actually found that, it doesn't work if you do a gratitude journal every day. It's null effect. It only works if you do it 3 times a week. You do it 1 time a week or every day. For some reason, there's no change. Something with the dose is like 3 times a week is the right dose. So for me, that's where AI is actually the most exciting. Yeah. When you can start to look at millions of interventions on these platforms and you can start to emergently say, for a person of your background, build, everything, like you need to engage with this much coaching, right? And that can be hyper cost effective, hyper targeted, just like a pharmaceutical, right? And that's where I think you can achieve the scale that we all want to see in the world.
That's exciting.
I completely agree. I think the one-size-fits-all has been the detriment of coaching for a very long time. And I think the fact that we are bringing platforms to the market that are giving people access to coaching and finding the right coach for them, because not having a coach and having the wrong coach are both just as detrimental. It's like trying a bad cookie one time and you never want a cookie ever again.
That's right.
But I think with AI and science and data and knowing how close you are to reaching your potential and then setting new goals for yourself and all that, we're really going to change the way coaching is thought of. It's no longer the troublemaker in a company like it was 20 years ago. It's now, we want to help you become the best that you can be and maybe even become the best you can be and leave here and do something great. And we're becoming less selfish in the way that we're treating employees and people. We're really treating them as their own potential and their own future and giving them access to that.
That's awesome. Well, right on the dot there. I appreciate everyone's time. Obviously, we all spent time even before this panel prepping, and thank you for everything that you put through, and thank you all for sitting with us here.
Thank you.